Hi, so my name is Kevin, y'all know that. And I'm going to be repeating the claim that public schools are better than private schools. And the first secondary claim that was given was that private schools lack diversity. The second one was that private schools force religious affiliation or other kinds of beliefs on their students. And the third secondary claim was that private schools do not offer the same amount of classes as public schools because of the lack of government funding. So going back to the first secondary claim, private schools are actually pretty diverse. Being that I went to a private school, I know that at my high school and various other high schools that were private that I visited, there was all kinds of races, and there was no kind of racism that was evident, at least not the way it seems to be in public schools. So private schools do aim for diversity, especially because it is a tuition-based system. They need as much help with tuition from the student and fundraising as they can get. Now, with real-life situations, there was exposure to real-life situations in private school, and counselors and teachers were always there. Violence, drugs, and sex is not something that just occurs in private school or in public school, as Alyssa claimed. It's something that occurs inside and outside school. So no matter where the student attends, at some point they will be introduced to these experiences, and it's their choice to partake in them or not to. So for the secondary claim number 2, it's commonly thought that private schools force religion upon the students even if they don't want to. But according to a survey conducted by the National Center for Education Statistics, there was over 7,000 non-sectarian private schools in the U.S., meaning that they don't belong to any kind of religion. That leaves almost 20,000 schools that are private, operating with a religious background, but the majority of these don't force their students to gather from their religion. I know that being from my school, I was able to make friends with Buddhists, Catholics, Christians, and Hindus. And still there were some other religions that were prominent at my school as well, even though it was a Christian school. And now this is secondary claim number 3, was that academic opportunities are limited at private schools because of the lack of government funding. And according to an article published by the New York Times in 2005, a school in Baltimore, being Barclay Elementary and Middle School, adopted the curriculum of a private school after scrapping their citywide public school curriculum. In doing this, they were able to see that the students showed a marked improvement in reasoning and understanding when compared to the other private schools in the same district. Now, the private school curriculum is almost always considered more rigorous than a public school, and many proponents for public schools would believe that teachers stress out the students and that, in turn, the students don't do as well. But it actually prepares students better for college and for different experiences in life. And a study conducted in 2006 by Harvard University found that students from private schools came out ahead in 11 of 12 comparisons in things such as test scores, reading, and mathematics. Now, it was claimed that private schools are very selective and would not help students such as students that would fall in the No Child Left Behind Act in public schools, but the whole idea behind a private school is to be selective, but they do try to admit as many students as they can, and they help students with various academic levels, especially those who are lacking to a point where they could drop out. The teachers at private schools tend to have an increased interest in their students excel, and they have more available time due to the smaller class sizes. Private high schools usually have a student body in the lower 100 range. And as an example, my senior class had 25 people in it, so the teacher was never too busy to help other students that were lacking. So in conclusion, I hope you see that private schools offer many benefits that public schools do not, such as small class sizes, accelerated academic programs, independence, and a healthy respect for people with all types of backgrounds.
Thank you. Well, all the structural stuff in the argument is fine. I thought on the first point, on the issue of diversity, you're a little dependent on your own personal experience on that, and I thought that that was problematic. One of the things that you might want to do is contrast that to the evidence that the advocate used in their argument, and I really don't hear many references to any of the advocate's evidence or to the way they reason, mostly just to the structure and to your counterclaims. So I'm not sure whether or not your experience is superior in making this inference to the experience that the advocate presented. There's no additional data on that point, so it's a little bit problematic. The second part of that first point seems to be about real-world experiences, and here you just kind of make a counter-assertion. Well, the advocate says they don't really have real-world experiences, and you come back and say, yeah, they do. And we don't get any proof on this, and we don't have any comparison to what the advocate is talking about. This would have been something easy to find some data on to suggest, for instance, that drugs, sexuality, harassment, bullying, I have penetrated plenty of private schools, and I don't think you'd have a hard time finding some data on that. So I think you left an opportunity here on the table, and you really could have used that information more strongly on that first point. On the second point, I thought that you did a little bit better job suggesting about how there is diversity in the religious backgrounds in private schools by pointing at, you had the one statistic that talked about how many of the private schools have no sectarian background to them. And then again, we're back to a personal example here, which is okay, but I'm not exactly sure how do I contrast that to the personal example that was presented by the advocate. So we run into the same problem on this point. The strongest argument, though, that you had was on the third point, where you were talking about the curriculum, the performance of students in private schools relative to schools and people in public schools, and you had some good data on all of those things. And then your personal experience about the student-teacher ratio is pretty good, and it's already suggested by the earlier evidence that the schools end up performing better, so it's easier to accept that last personal example. And again, there's not really much discussion of the advocate's points on these. It's mostly counterclaim on these points. All right, thank you.